really don't like to acknowledge that on the left. And that's when Al Green got up there and started harassing Trump. This was debated, interestingly, the other day when Stephen A. Smith went on The View. And Joy Behar, she too pushed back. And even on this morning's The Daily, Maggie Haberman was pushing back on just how historic the victory. They really don't want to say historic. They don't want to say mandate. They don't want to say any of the things that Trump says. And they
It started like any other episode of the Viewa Room, full of confident hosts, sipping coffee, tossing opinions, and trading lines that usually echo each other. But then he walked in. No script. No smiley pleasantries, just presence. And within minutes, the entire mood changed. The audience could feel it.
Comfortable all those women in the panel were by literally sitting next to a black man that's not just gonna nod on like a bobblehead and go along with all their Democrat talking points. So look, the Democrats have a blackmail problem, right? Everybody knows that. And Stephen A. Smith has been very savvy in kind of like coming from the sports commentator world. He's extremely successful, and then kind of putting himself into the space where I'm gonna say I am not for Trump, but I am going to sit here and I'm going to tell you the truth about everything that is going on right now. It's very savvy because, and this is where I'll throw the black card down on the table. If you are a black man, Democrats have absolutely nothing to offer.
You could see the tension in the way the hosts shifted in their seats. This wasn't going to be a friendly chat. This was going to be a showdown.
Supporter of Trump. I'm a supporter of truth and the facts. And here's the facts. The man won every swing state. He increased in terms of his voter turnout in his favor from the standpoint of blacks, Latinos, and young voters. He increased his numbers in that regard from 2020. 89% of the counties shifted to the right.
He didn't tiptoe around I've cut straight through the noise. While most guests nod politely or sugarcoat their words, he came in swinging with one bold truth after another. The hot topic? Trump's shocking victory. But what really turned heads was his refusal to go along with the media narrative.
Thoughts on the election as it just went down?
I was surprised at how lopsided it was. I was not surprised by the outcome. I saw the outcome coming from a mile away. You have to take into account, listen, we respect our president, Joe Biden, but here's the reality. He got into office, he promised to be a transitional president, to be a stopgap to pave the way for somebody else to come on board. Into the midterms, it was supposed to be a red wave. It did not happen.
Trump's only been in office for 6 weeks. Seems like 6 years, doesn't it? And he's been going around with his cronies touting his so-called landslide and blowout win. But he won the popular vote by 1.5%, one of the smallest ever, and he won the general election by less than 50%. So what kind of mandate is this really?
Well, it is a mandate, and I'm going to explain why.
He said what everyone else on the panel wouldn't dare say out loud, that the win wasn't just a win, it was historic, a mandate, a gut punch to the political establishment. And when the hosts tried to push back, he didn't flinch. He stood his ground, cool and calm, dismantling their arguments like dominoes. By the way, before we continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and share more intriguing stories like this. Now, let's continue.
Press things later on. That's always been his MO, and that's what we've seen.
Yeah, well, I want to go back to what you said about black men being very comfortable with matriarchy, and I agree with that because, you know, black households are often led by a grandmother, black grandmother or black mother. However, 55% of Latino men voted for Trump. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think that economically, they were looking at things. First of all, you've got, in this country, you've got Cubans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Guatemalans, Venezuelans, Colombians, et cetera, et cetera. And if you talk to the Hispanic community, depending on who you're talking to, they think differently. The Cubans think differently than the Dominicans. The Dominicans think different than Colombians. To some,
this wasn't just a guest appearance. It was a moment that cracked the surface of mainstream media's comfort zone. And the deeper he went, the more uncomfortable things got. And here's where it got even more explosive.
Said you were, way back in 2016, before Trump ran for president, you were friendly with him because he's really into sports. And you said that the fact that he's a sports guy, which I didn't realize because I don't think of sports when I look at him, but yeah, I'm not even being snarky. I just don't think of a sports guy.
What about riding around in a golf cart? Doesn't that count?
Right. But you, on the other hand, I get, you said that being a sports guy helped him.
well,
what did you mean by that?
Because what happened is that a lot of African Americans, Latinos, and others We associated ourselves with him because he would host fights at Trump casinos. He would show up at basketball games.
He brought up something no one at that table wanted to touch: the sudden shift in support among Black and Latino voters. You could almost hear the air leave the room when he said it. He laid out the numbers with no hesitation. Trump didn't just scrape by, he surged in every major demographic the Democrats thought they had locked down.
What does that say about the Republican Party?
It's not about what it says about the Republican Party. It's about what it says about the Democratic Party.
Why?
Because in the end, if you think about him being impeached twice, 34 felony counts or 34 felony convictions, and they still elected him president, it's not about him winning. It was an indictment against the Democratic Party and what the Democratic Party was offering to American citizens. We might sit up there and talk about, hey, you should be a party for the working class, which the Democratic Party was once known for. They're not known for that right now. Why? Because their message was catering towards others and towards other issues, and they forgot about the people that brought them there, that elevated the Democratic Party to what it was over these last few.
Black voters, Latino voters, young voters. The map wasn't just red, it was blazing red, with nearly 90% of counties flipping to the right. And yet, the media refused to call it a mandate. They refused to admit what just happened. The ladies on the panel looked stunned. Some tried to change the subject, others pushed back with emotional appeals. But he kept bringing it back to one thing facts. He said he's no Trump supporter, but he is a supporter of truth.
The virtue of Stephen A. Okay, and I don't mean to canonize this guy. And I'm afraid, because I know what happens when somebody's getting elevated, there's now a price on you to bring you down. And I don't want to see that for him. So that's why I'm shy on this. But he is also a reminder that reasonable should be a commodity. It should be a commodity. The fact that you got to be full-on MAGA or you got to want to kill Trump.
Yeah, about politics. And you said that you were not shocked that Trump won, but you were stunned that it was a landslide. Why do you think most people didn't see it coming?
Because the pollsters told us, and we believed them, that it was going to be a tight race. They were in panic mode. And the reason why so many people were in panic mode was because the tighter the race, the more chaos presumably would ensue, because he would automatically say it was rigged. He would challenge the outcome of the election. We all knew this. And as a result, folks were fearful that it was going to be a replica of 2020.
And the truth, whether people like it or not, is that millions of people, many from communities the Democrats once dominated, chose to walk away. He called it a political earthquake, a shift that nobody in the mainstream wanted to admit happened. And in that moment, on national TV, he did what very few are brave enough to do, said what half the country had been thinking, while sitting face to face with people who didn't want to hear it. And just like that, things weren't so comfortable anymore.
Stern says that he wasn't confident that the country was ready to elect the first female president because he knows, quote, how men talk behind closed doors about us. So we're very privileged to have a great guy here today.
Yeah.
Tell her, what do men say about us behind closed doors?
Well, first of all,
say it to our faces.
Yeah, do tell.
I don't hide, so no worries there. Here's the deal. I respectfully disagree with Howard Stern, only from the standpoint that I wish he had been more specific. Why don't you say white men? Because let me tell you something about black men. I must confess, I wish I could debate some of these guys. I'd love to be on a debate stage going up against these guys with the presidency on the line.
We will arrange that.
I'm half joking, but I kind of mean it. I mean, I have no desire to be a congressional figure or a senator. But if you came to me and you told me I had a legitimate shot to win the presidency of the United States of America, I would definitely consider it. But here's the problem.
So you want to break through the line?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Then he dropped a bombshell that made every host at the table sit up straighter. He looked them dead in the eye and said something that almost never gets said on shows like The View. The Democratic Party has nothing to offer black men. Not less, not something, nothing. You could see the discomfort ripple across the panel. The polite smiles disappeared. It wasn't a soundbite. It wasn't a jab. It was a statement grounded in lived experience, and it hit like a punch to the gut. He wasn't speaking in hypotheticals. He was speaking as someone who's been watching politics long enough to see the patterns. And he called out the cold truth. The party that once claimed to be the voice of the working class has drifted away from the people who helped build it. He pointed out how so many black men feel unheard, overlooked, and taken for granted. He said they're tired of being treated like they're supposed to fall in line just because. And he made it personal. He threw down what he called the black card, saying, if you're a black man in America right now, you're looking around and realizing that nobody is really speaking to you unless you're towing the same tired line. It wasn't just criticism, it was a wake-up call, and in that room full of powerful voices, his was the one that finally said what had been boiling under the surface for years. From there, he went straight into the numbers, and this part left the whole panel scrambling. He broke it down. Trump won every swing state, every single one. But it didn't stop there. He pointed out that Trump actually grew his support from 2020, especially among groups the Democrats thought were locked in black voters, Latino voters, even younger voters. And while the media kept calling it a close race, the reality told a different story. He didn't sugarcoat anything. Nearly 90% of counties in America shifted to the right. That's not a coincidence. That's not random. That's a landslide. But for some reason, nobody on that couch wanted to call it what it was. One host tried to argue that Trump only won the popular vote by 1.5%. Another claimed that he didn't even crack 50% of the general vote. But he cut through that spin instantly. He explained why it still counted as a mandate. Because what matters isn't just percentages, it's momentum, it's turnout. It's the people who flipped their vote, who crossed the line, who made a choice to change direction. And as they fumbled with stats and phrasing, he sat there steady, explaining how the media downplaying the results wasn't just misleading, it was deliberate. Because if they admitted the truth, they'd have to explain how they missed it so badly. And no one on that stage wanted to take that blame. Then came one of the most unexpected turns in the conversation. He brought up something that completely flipped the energy in the room: matriarchy in black communities. He said it plainly: black men are used to being raised by strong women grandmothers, mothers, aunts. That dynamic has shaped entire generations. But he didn't say it as an insult. He said it as a fact. And from that foundation, he explained why so many black and Latino men are now choosing leaders who project strength, confidence, and directness 7 if they're flawed. One of the hosts asked about Latino men specifically, pointing out that 55% of them voted for Trump. Her tone was part confusion, part disbelief. But he had a clear answer: economics. He explained how the Latino community isn't a monolith. Cubans think differently than Mexicans. Dominicans have different concerns than Venezuelans or Colombians. And most of them weren't voting based on identity. They were voting based on results, jobs, taxes, cost of living, stability. That one line, "It's the economy," landed hard, because while politicians on TV are debating pronouns and hashtags, people out here are wondering how they're going to pay rent or afford gas. He said many voters weren't looking for perfect. They were looking for someone who would fight for their livelihood. And in that moment, he connected cultural reality to political choice, and the panel had nothing to say back. Then came the part that made jaws drop. One of the hosts tried to shift the conversation by bringing up Trump's past connections to sports. Kind of a throwaway comment meant to lighten the mood. But instead, it gave him the perfect opening. He leaned in and said something that shocked them. Way before Trump ever ran for president, he was already a known figure in the black and Latino communities, not because of politics, but because of sports. He reminded them that Trump used to show up at boxing matches, basketball games, and big sports events. He wasn't sitting in the back row either. He was front and center shaking hands, taking pictures, hosting fights at his casinos. People saw that. And in those moments, he wasn't Trump the politician. He was Trump the showman, someone who was present in the spaces people cared about. That visibility mattered, especially to people who often felt ignored by political elites. Then he flipped it again. He said, "This isn't really about what that says about Trump. It's about what it says about the Democratic Party." Because even after Trump got impeached twice, even after being convicted on 34 felony counts, people still voted for him. Why? Because it wasn't a vote for Trump, it was a vote against the Democrats. He called it an indictment not of a man, but of an entire political machine that's been talking down to its base instead of listening. And at that point, it didn't matter how uncomfortable the room got, the truth was already out there. He didn't stop there. The next thing he said sent shockwaves through the room, and not because it was loud or flashy. It was calm, direct, and absolutely undeniable. He looked around and said the Democratic Party used to be the party of the working class. Used to be, but not anymore. Because somewhere along the way, they stopped focusing on regular, everyday people and started chasing applause from the loudest corners of social media. They were catering to fringe issues, symbolic gestures, cultural hashtags while ignoring the people who actually put them in office. He made it clear, working people, especially in Black and Latino communities, are tired of speeches. They're tired of being told what to think. And most of all, they're tired of struggling while politicians sit on TV and brag about wins that don't change anything in real life. And just when you thought he was done, he threw in one more twist, said the media was afraid of him. Not personally, but what he represented, reasonable voices. The kind of voice that didn't scream MAGA slogans, but also didn't toe the liberal line. A voice that was rooted in logic, fact, and lived experience. And he warned when someone like that starts speaking up, they become a threat to the system. Because the system survives by dividing people into two extremes, and when someone shows up in the middle clear-headed, informed, and unbought, they break the illusion. That's what made this moment so dangerous for the status quo. Then he hit them with the part that nobody saw coming. He said he wasn't shocked that Trump won. He expected it. What shocked him was how badly Trump won. A blowout, a landslide. And he said the only reason people didn't see it coming was because they chose not to. He called out the pollsters. He called out the media. He even called out voters who let themselves believe that this was going to be a tight race. Because they were spoon-fed that narrative day after day, headline after headline. But behind closed doors? He said panic had already set in. Everyone knew if the race got too close, Trump would cry foul, claim it was rigged, and throw the country into chaos again. So the media kept saying it would be tight, to keep people calm, to avoid more drama. But it wasn't close. And here's where he flipped the spotlight onto the culture. When Howard Stern said America wasn't ready for a female president because of how men talk behind closed doors, the panel nodded. But this guest? He wasn't having it. He pushed back hard. He said Stern should have been specific, because not all men talk like that. He said, "Why don't you say white men?" And then, without blinking, added, "Black men don't talk about women like that." The room went silent. It wasn't about defending Trump. It was about calling out lazy generalizations that pass for analysis. And in that moment, the conversation got very real, very fast. Then, right when you thought it couldn't get more intense, he turned the spotlight on himself. Half serious, half not, he said he'd love to be on a presidential debate stage. Not as a host, as a candidate. He said if someone came up to him with a legitimate shot at the presidency, he'd take it seriously. Not for fame, not for clout, but because he knows he could hold his own. And deep down, you could tell he meant it. But here's where it got really powerful. He started describing what it's like to turn on a show like The View, expecting the usual mix of laughs, banter, and politics lighty, and instead, seeing someone walk in and completely flip the energy. No fluff, no fake smiles, no pre-written talking points, just raw, direct truth. And the hosts? They didn't know what to do with it. They tried to interrupt. They tried to steer the conversation back to their comfort zone. But it didn't work. He was too focused, too prepared. Every point he made landed like a punch. And he never raised his voice once. No yelling, no name-calling, just one truth after another. He said it straight. The media has been crafting this picture of a country on the edge, bitterly divided with razor-thin margins. But if you looked at the numbers, the real numbers, you'd see something totally different. A massive, clear shift. A map soaked in red, telling a story the pundits were too afraid to admit. And he wasn't done yet. What came next was the moment that truly made the room crack. He brought up something that had been completely ignored: the surge in minority support for Trump. Not as a fluke, not as a protest vote, but as a message. A warning shot to the Democratic Party that the old rules no longer apply. He said this wasn't about slogans. It wasn't about Twitter trends or viral speeches. It was about real people, dealing with real problems, making real decisions. And for a lot of voters, especially in Black and Latino communities, supporting Trump wasn't about loving the man. It was about survival. People weren't casting a vote based on personality. They were making a beta gamble that maybe, Just maybe, this guy who's been ridiculed and dragged through the mud might actually do something different. Because the other side, the side that claimed to care, had stopped listening. And here's what really stunned the panel, he said. Minority voters didn't betray their communities. They just stopped letting the media speak for them. They stopped allowing late-night talk shows and activist influencers to shape how they feel, how they vote, and how they see themselves. He said the so-called shocking support for Trump wasn't shocking at all if you've actually been paying attention. It was years of frustration, disappointment, and feeling invisible boiling over into one massive political realignment. And every time he said it, he made sure to remind them this isn't some theory, this is already happening. Then he took it even further, cutting into something most networks won't touch with a 10-foot pole. He started talking about how media narratives are built, not by accident, not out of ignorance, but intentionally. He said mainstream outlets have created echo chamber-sloughed, one-sided bubbles where dissenting opinions are either ignored, mocked, or flat-out shut down. And the result? People are no longer thinking for themselves. They're just repeating whatever their favorite anchor or influencer told them to think that week. He didn't dance around it. He said the media's obsession with symbolic victories is part of the problem. Because while networks celebrate hashtags and culture war wins, regular people are still sitting at home struggling to pay bills, to keep their kids safe, to find decent jobs. He gave voice to the silent frustration brewing across working-class communities. He said these voters aren't obsessed with political labels, they're obsessed with results. And when results don't come, when the people in charge stop talking about things that actually matter, voters tune out. Or worse, they flip sides. And that's what the panel just couldn't understand. They kept trying to make it about personalities, scandals, and vibes. But he brought it back to basics. Jobs, money, safety, opportunity. He said the media loves to simplify things into neat little boxes, but voters aren't boxes, they're people. And once they feel ignored or misrepresented, they will go looking elsewhere. And that's exactly what they just did. Then he brought it home with a cold truth that hung in the air like smoke. He said this wasn't just about politics. It was about identity, and not the kind politicians talk about in speeches. This was about how people actually see themselves in a country that feels like it's changing too fast and too far from their reality. He said minority voters didn't just wake up one day and decide to support Trump. It was a buildup, years of feeling like props in someone else's message. Tired of being used for optics, but ignored when it came time for real policy. He said many of these voters began to see their concerns brushed aside in favor of elite, culture-based debates that didn't affect their rent, their safety, or their kids' future. And when they tried to speak up, the media painted them as confused, uneducated, or even traitorous. He said that framing that automatic dismissal is what pushed people even further away from the Democratic Party. People don't want to be told they're wrong for struggling. They want someone who'll admit the struggle exists and promise to do something about it. He described the voters' shift as a conscious, deliberate choice to know some blind loyalty to a controversial figure. These people weren't clinging to one issue. They were making a statement, saying, if no one's going to fight for us, we'll back the one who'd do 7 if he's messy. And in that moment, he shattered the myth that voter behavior is simple. Because it's not. It's human. And it's loud now. And then, just when it felt like the conversation couldn't go any deeper, he turned the whole thing upside down. He said elections aren't won by catchy slogans or fancy ads. They're won in living rooms, on factory floors, in grocery store aisles. They're won in the everyday lives of people who are trying to survive. He pointed out that voters didn't choose Trump because of some wild devotion. They chose him because nothing else was working. He said, for many, it was a pragmatic decision. A risk, yes, but one that felt worth taking. Because when both parties talk and talk, but your bills keep rising, your streets stay unsafe, and your job still doesn't pay enough to live, you stop caring about political theater. You start asking, who's going to actually change something? That's why this wasn't just a Republican win. It was a wake-up call, a message to anyone who thought their support was automatic. He said these voters flipped because they were done waiting, done listening to promises, and most of all, done letting pundits define them. The panel sat there, stunned. Not because he was being aggressive, but because he was being honest. And that honesty cracked through every polished talking point on that set. Because what he was saying, It wasn't about defending Trump, it was about exposing how badly both the media and the political class had misread the people they claimed to represent. And he wasn't finished yet. Then he went straight for the issue that no one at that table wanted to touch: the border crisis. He didn't dance around it, he didn't sugarcoat it, he called it what it was: a disaster. And he blamed it squarely on Joe Biden's immigration policies. No polite language, no politically correct detours. Just the blunt truth that the current system wasn't working and voters knew it. He said Americans weren't turning against immigration itself, they were turning against the chaos. The overwhelmed detention centers, the surging border crossings, the small towns stretched to the limit trying to house and support thousands of new arrivals. And all the while, the Democratic Party kept repeating the same lines about compassion and asylum, but ignoring the strain on actual communities. He said the party had trapped itself in a contradiction. On one hand, they wanted to look humane. On the other, they refused to admit that the situation was out of control. And voters, especially working-class ones, weren't buying it anymore. The panel tried to spin it back to empathy and America's legacy as a land of opportunity. But he wasn't letting that slide. He said, you can't solve a humanitarian crisis by pretending it's not a crisis. And he said politicians have been hiding behind feel-good language to avoid making the hard decisions. Then he pointed straight at the camera at all the viewers and said, this is why people are walking away from the party, not because they hate immigrants, but because they're tired of leaders who refuse to deal with reality. And that moment, that was the breaking point. And finally, he brought it all to a head by going after the media machine itself. He said what everyone's been thinking, but few are willing to say out loud, that the media isn't just reporting on politics anymore, they're shaping it, twisting it, packaging it into sound bites designed to feed outrage, boost ratings, and silence anything that doesn't fit the script. He laid it out plain. For years, the media has been clinging to a narrative that no longer matches reality. They keep selling the same tired stories. Trump is evil, Democrats are the saviors, voters are sheep. But the numbers don't lie. The country has changed. The voters have changed. And if the media refuses to evolve, they'll get left behind. He called on people watching at home to wake up. Stop blindly trusting headlines. Start asking better questions. Demand better coverage. He talked about how social media has made it worse trapping people in bubbles, feeding them only what they already believe, and making real dialogue nearly impossible. But he didn't just rant. He offered a challenge. If we want better politics, we need better media. We need truth, even when it's messy, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. And that, right there, was the message that echoed far beyond the studio walls. Clips from his appearance exploded across the internet. People weren't just watching, they were talking, arguing, thinking. Because what he did that day wasn't just shake up a panel show. He held a mirror up to the entire system and forced everyone to take a good, hard look. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Also, drop your thoughts in the comments. See you on the next one.